Thank you everyone for joining us. Good evening. We hope you're doing well. Tonight we have a fascinating discussion, discussing a very important question, a question that has been grappled with throughout history, certainly for a very long time. And tonight we're going to, first of all, get your opinion about it, but also to focus on the Jewish view, what Judaism brings to the table, what perspective Judaism has on this topic, and to explore all of that. Question, of course, is, do we have free choice, or are we programmed? Is life already predetermined, or do we have the possibility to choose where life will take us? In other words, am I a product of my nature, my internal makeup, my upbringing, my DNA, my society, the opportunities that I have? Am I a product of all of this? Or could I truly make choices that are independent of who I am as a person, my internal makeup, and the situations that I find myself in? So am I forced, am I programmed, so to speak, into these life situations and nature and nurture, upbringing and all of that? Or do I actually have the possibility to put that on the side, so to speak, and make a free choice, make a real decision, independent of all of that? That is the question for this evening. A very philosophical question, also a very important question. And that is what we're going to discuss, and that is what we would like to get the Jewish view and the Jewish perspective on. But first, I want to take a couple of moments to hear your opinion. What do you think? How would you answer this question? What is your perspective? If anybody has something to share, an opinion, a comment, a feeling, please share it with us. It's okay if you never thought about this question before, but in case you did.
Well, I do.
Please go ahead.
I think God takes a certain portion of responsibility on himself, the major portion of responsibility, in terms of God has an ideal, he has a desire, he has a quest. He wants us to be able to become one with him, one family with him, loving each other, loving one another, loving the creation. But he gives us also a certain amount of freedom, and we have a choice as to whether we're going to be responsible with that freedom that we're given or not. And and the verse in the Bible that makes it clear that we definitely have a choice is Genesis 6 and 7, which explains how God grieved that he made man, and it pained him in his heart. So in other words, this was around the time of Noah, when everyone was when there was outside of Noah himself and his family was committing all kinds of immoral actions, and it wasn't going the way God wanted, and he was miserable as a result of that. And so this was not God's will. God didn't predetermine that, because he wouldn't have been grieved otherwise. You don't become grieved if you're expecting something to happen.
Okay, that sounds good. Any other opinions or ideas? Please go ahead. Just unmute yourself first, if you're muted. Don't be shy. I could continue, but I think it might be interesting if we get some more opinions. But there's no pressure. There's no problem. If not,
the biggest question that we have dealt with since I've learned some philosophy in the university is the question about responsibility. If everything is predetermined, what does it mean to have a criminal system and hold somebody accountable for their actions? That's it's always when this comes up in class, it's always people tend to go either way, and it sometimes gets heated, but usually people reach the conclusion that we need to be held accountable. But it's very different if people really think everything is predetermined and the will cannot be free in any sense. That's it's a tricky one. It's very hard to go down that line. I think
Okay,
I tend to go the one with the free will.
we're going down that road tonight. We're going down the road of this question tonight, so hold on tight.
Yeah.
Okay, anyone else before we move on? Okay, so I'll tell you 3 perspectives and 3 opinions that I found in my research. So I just did a little bit of a prior knowledge, a philosophy, a little bit of a Googling around in Wikipedia, and I came across 3 general opinions, and of course they branch out into many views and sub perspectives. But I came across 3 major ones, and I'll just say them quickly so that we could see what what other philosophers are saying, and then we could have more of a context for the Jewish perspective, and then we could we have something to compare it to. So the first theory is called determinism, and it's pretty self-explanatory. Determinism claims and holds the view that everything is predetermined, and this doesn't need a lot of explaining. Everyone is made up of a full character. We have certain, we're pulled to certain things, we're attracted to certain things, and it's our nature together with our nurture, together with life situations. Theoretically, if somebody has enough information, they could predict your every decision. Because if they know everything about you, and they know your internal makeup, and they know what circumstance faces you, they could predict what you're going to have for breakfast, and maybe what field you're going to go into, and what job you're going to try to get. And every time there's a crossroads, based on the circumstances, theoretically, your decisions can be predicted if there's enough information about you. So that's a theory of determinism. There's also the theory of indeterminism, which is exactly the opposite. That theory holds that what happens in decisions that are made in a person's life are not the result of anything, but they're completely random. They're completely random. This view could also fit with saying that decisions are a result of certain causes, but it's possible for there to be more than one choice, more than one outcome. Okay, so again, determinism is saying that there's only one course that your life could take, and every decision that you make theoretically could be predicted, because according to your makeup and your life situations, there's basically only one way that you're going to go. Indeterminism is saying either that the choices are completely random, or that there could be more than one outcome. So that's obviously the opinion that thinks free choice. And the third major opinion that I found was called compatibilism. And what this one holds is kind of a combination between the two, some sort of combination between determinism and indeterminism. And what it says is that a desire that you have, or a will that you have, that is caused by either something inside of you or some external reason. So there is a cause to everything. all of everything that you think, every one of your desires, your will, that everything has a cause. So that all of that is determined. So what's predetermined is whatever you're going to think. And then you have a choice, says this opinion, whether or not to act upon it. Okay, so this is not a class on general philosophy. This is about trying to get the Jewish view, but I thought it would be good to see, different views, different perspectives, so that we could have something to compare it to, and perhaps we could have more of appreciation for the Jewish view. Okay, so let us look at the Jewish view. We want to answer the question and to understand the fundamental question: is life predetermined? Is everything about us predetermined, or are we truly free to make a choice independent of our personality and independent of circumstances and upbringing and life situations that we are kind of forced into? So the first place I would like to look into for some understanding of the Jewish perspective is, of course, the Torah. And we're going to look at one verse in the Torah. Actually, it's two verses together. And this is going to give us a general approach. So it's not going to give us a detailed answer, because almost nothing in the Torah is going to be in full detail. Almost everything is in short, concise, sometimes only in a hint. So first we're going to look at the Torah for a general approach, and then we're going to look into the writings of the sages and the Torah scholars for further understanding and detail. And detail here is going to be very important. So text number 1 on your source sheet, if you have it in front of you, that's great. If you don't, that's also fine. It's quite short. I'll read it out loud. It's a verse from the 5th book of the Torah, Devarim, or Deuteronomy, and it says like this: "This day I call upon the heaven and the earth as witnesses that I have warned you. I have set before you life and death, the blessing and the curse. You shall choose life so that you and your offspring will live." So what's very clear in this verse is that there is freedom of choice. God says there is life and there is death, there is blessing and there is curse. You shall choose life. So God is saying that there is choice. You have to make the right choice. It's up to you to make the right choice. If God is saying to you that you need to make the right choice, obviously you're able to. God wouldn't say make a choice if you're bound and if you're stuck by your nature and who you are and you're not able to. So if God is giving the commandment saying choose life, obviously the Torah and Judaism believes that we do in fact have freedom of choice. So we don't know the details yet. We don't understand how it works. But one thing is for sure, the Torah insists that we do in fact have freedom of choice. Now, Aaron brought my strongest argument. He already said it, bit of a spoiler, but that's all right. I'm glad you brought up such a powerful argument. And that is, if there is no free choice, then how could you hold people accountable? How could you punish someone? How could you punish a criminal? If they don't have free choice, then it means that it wasn't their fault that they committed a certain crime. It wasn't their fault that they stole. It wasn't their fault that they murdered. They were brought up in a broken home. They were poor, did not have a proper education, did not have access to certain opportunities that most people have. How could you blame, right? So that's what you would say. That's what you would say if there's no freedom of choice. Now, I'm not suggesting that we shouldn't be sensitive to people's backgrounds. Of course, we have to. But the fundamental idea is, and the fundamental belief is that people have freedom of choice. And I think the strongest argument for that is because otherwise, how could we hold people accountable? How could we hold a criminal accountable for something bad that they did? How could we give credit or give reward to someone who did something good. If they're just a product of their nature and their surroundings and what they're made up of, their DNA and the opportunities that they had, then it's not the criminal's fault and it's not the good person's achievement. So there should be no accountability, and there should be no reward, no punishment. Now, obviously, we do hold people accountable, and that is because fundamentally, the Torah believes that people have freedom to choose. Okay, so that's the idea. That is the fundamental idea. That is the position that Judaism takes, but we still don't have the details, and we still don't understand exactly how it works. So let's think about it for a moment. Do we really have freedom of choice? Do we truly have the ability to choose? So if you think about it, fundamental aspects of our life are imposed upon us, and we're not given any say on the matter. So the first thing is, we didn't choose to be born, right? We were just born. Nobody asked us first. We didn't choose to whom to be born to. We didn't choose who our parents should be. That's a pretty big decision there. It's going to shape our whole life, who our parents are. We didn't choose what time in history to be born. That's a pretty big deal. If you're going to be born in the 21st century, or you're going to be born, a few hundred years ago when life was completely different, that's a pretty big decision. Again, imposed upon us. Furthermore, we have our character, our talents, our weaknesses. Nobody asked our opinion about any of this. So what kind of freedom of choice do we actually have? What kind of decisions are we actually making? These fundamental aspects of our life really shape our lives in so many ways. Who your parents are, what your education is going to be like, what kind of childhood you had, and your adult life is so connected to and so dependent on your childhood. So so much, and your character, your talents, your faults, your weaknesses, your strengths, all of this really shapes a person. And of course it has it seemingly does have an impact on our decision making. You can't deny that these things have an impact. A kind person by nature is going to make kind choices, right? So so obviously, so the question is, where is the freedom of choice? We understand that the Torah is saying that it believes that there is freedom of choice, but what are we actually choosing? So for further detail and for more understanding, we're going to look into the Talmud. Talmud has much more detail than just that general verse in the Torah. So let's look into the Talmud, and it's the text number 2 on your sheets, and we'll read it together. So the bold words are the actual text of the Talmud, and the regular characters in between are just to help explain what the Talmud is actually saying. So, text number 2. The angel, this comes from a Talmud tractate Nida, page 16b. The angel that is appointed over conception is called Night. That's the name of the angel. And that angel takes the drop of sperm and presents it before the Holy One, blessed be he, and says before him, Master of the universe, what will be of this drop? Will the person fashioned from it be mighty or weak? Will he be clever or stupid? Will he be wealthy or poor? But this angel does not say, will he be wicked or righteous? This is in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Hanina. As Rabbi Hanina said, everything is in the hands of heaven except for fear of heaven. Okay, so now the Talmud is giving us a much clearer picture of how freedom of choice works. So what's very clear is that our life situations, our character, talents, weaknesses, opportunities, all of these things, which is basically, the platform and the stage where we play life, all of this is pre-planned and all of this is predetermined, right? The Talmud talked about wealthy or poor, clever or stupid, mighty or weak. All of these things have tremendous impact on everything in your life. So what the Talmud is saying is that the situations in your life, the circumstances, who you are as a person, your DNA, your character, your weaknesses, your strengths, all of this is pre-planned and predetermined. So where is the freedom of choice? That, says the Talmud, is when you arrive at situations. So the situations are pre-planned, but then you'll find yourself in a situation, and then that is where your freedom of choice kicks in. That is where you have the opportunity to choose between right and wrong, between good and bad. So you have a moral choice to make. You have a moral choice to make. You arrive at a situation in life. That is when so everything that leads up to that situation, everything that leads up to bringing you to this point, that has been planned. That's part of the plan that has been predetermined. But the choice that you're going to make at this junction, the choice that you're going to make to go the good way or the bad way, to do right or to do wrong, it's a moral question. And with morals, like the Talmud says that the angels does not ask wicked or righteous, because this is where free choice kicks in. This is where we have the opportunity to make a truly free choice that's independent of our life situation, our upbringing, our nature, our DNA, our character, and all of that. So God will orchestrate events, bring you to places, set up a situation, and then it's up to you to choose. So you could end up at an open cash machine where there's nobody watching, there's no video camera, there's no security camera, there's nothing there. So at that point, so you didn't choose. It's part of the plan that you're going to end up in front of that cash machine. But now that you're standing in front of the cash machine, now you have the freedom to choose between stealing and being honest. That's your choice. That's your choice. It doesn't matter what your education is. It doesn't matter who raised you. It doesn't matter your circumstances in life. That moral choice between honesty and stealing, that is an example of the choice that you have to make freely. That is a completely free choice, independent of everything that went on up until then. I'd like to share with you a story. It's a famous story. It's an oldie, but a goodie. The story is the story of Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. What happened? God put them in the garden and said, "You may eat from all of the trees except for one." There's one tree. It's called the tree of knowledge of good and bad. You're forbidden to eat from that tree. What happened? The serpent came, the snake, and convinced Eve to eat from the fruit. Then Eve went to Adam and convinced Adam to share the fruit with her. And the rest is history. I'd like to analyze. I know we didn't even talk about the details of the story, but those few sentences that I shared, I would like to analyze that bit of the story. And I'd like to raise the question, why is it that the serpent, why is it that the snake was chosen to be the agent with which to bring this challenge to Adam and Eve? Right? It could have been Satan, it could have been another agent. Many commentaries say that the serpent represents Satan. But why was the serpent chosen to be the agent with which to present this challenge to Adam and Eve to see whether or not they're going to be successful or they're going to stumble? Why was the serpent chosen? And so there's a hidden message here. The hidden message is that the snake was saying something, the snake was giving a certain explanation, and the snake was giving a certain reason for Chava, for Eve, to eat from the tree. What the snake was hinting to, what the snake was saying was, you are just like me. You are an animal. An animal has a certain nature. An animal is going to follow its nature. So its fate is basically predestined. The snake is a product. Any animal is a product of its nature. So its nature is going to determine how it is going to behave, what it's going to do. And what the snake was saying to Eve, the snake was saying, you are also an animal. You're just a human animal. And if you have a desire, if you have an instinct, you should follow that instinct. If you have a desire to eat fruit from this tree, you should go ahead and eat it. There's no reason not to. This is who you are. You should follow your nature and your instinct. That's what the snake was saying. That's why a snake was chosen. It's an animal. The animal is saying, you are no different than me. You human beings, Adam and Eve, you're no different than me. My fate is predestined. My nature, my actions are predetermined. The way I'm going to behave, you're the same. Go ahead and eat from the tree. But of course, this was a sin. Eating from the tree was a sin, and that's because the opposite is true. God says to Adam and Eve, God gave them the commandment because He expected them to make a choice and to make the right choice. So God was saying no. God was disagreeing with the serpent. God was saying, you have the freedom to break away from bad influences. You have the freedom to break away from your nature, from your animalistic instincts. You have the possibility, you have the opportunity to rise above the challenge and become a transformed person. So the snake was saying, you're just an animal. You should just follow your nature like animals do. God was saying, no, you're not bound by your nature. You're not stuck by your internal makeup and by your external life circumstances. Even if there is a certain plan and you're going to end up in certain situations and you're going to have certain circumstances, when you arrive at that situation, when you arrive at that circumstance, you have the opportunity to choose between good and bad. You don't have to follow your nature. You don't have to follow your instinct. You have the ability to rise above that, to break free from whatever your nature is limiting you to, and to make a free choice, to make the moral choice, and to choose good, and to choose honesty and what's right. Any questions on any of that? Any comments?
As it says that God said to Adam that and Eve that they should become lords of creation, and if they're going to be, they have to be above the instinctual, the power of of the influence of instinct to determine their actions rather than what they know is right. So they have, in order to be above the other things of creation that are driven by instinct.
Very good. Very good. So to summarize, we basically said two things so far. We said, number one, that our life situations are predetermined. So we end up in a circumstance. It's part of the plan. That's how it was supposed to be. So you didn't necessarily choose to be born, and to be born in the 1970s, 80s, or 90s, whatever it might be, to be born to your parents and to live in Iceland. A lot of these things, just are a part of the plan, and you didn't really have a choice. So maybe it seems like you have a choice because you're going to go on the internet and choose where you're going to fly to, where you're going to go, who you're going to marry, what you're going to do, who you're going to meet. So of course it seems like we have many choices, but if you think about it, so much is predetermined. So again, what is predetermined? Basically, all of our life situations, everything that happens to us, and the situation we find ourselves in, that is pre-planned, that's predetermined. Where do we have freedom of choice with morals? When it comes to choosing between good and bad, between right and wrong, what's morally good and what's morally bad, that is where we have freedom of choice. Now, I'd like to, so far we saw the verse in the Torah, we saw in the Talmud, a section from the Talmud. Now I'd like to I would like to look at text number 3, which is Maimonides. And this is going to be a little bit more at length, explaining why and explaining how the belief in freedom of choice is so central to the Jewish view and is so central to Judaism. And I'd like to read that. It's a little bit long, but we'll read through it quickly. Most of it are points that we already made, but this is going to emphasize that points and show us in the text how central this belief in freedom of choice is in Judaism. Here we go. Were God to decree that an individual would be righteous or wicked, or that there be a quality which draws a person by his essential nature to any particular path or behavior, a path of behavior, way of thinking, attributes or deeds as imagined by many of the fools who believe in astrology, how could he command us through the words of the prophets, do this, do not do this, improve your behavior, or do not follow after your wickedness? According to their mistaken conception, from the beginning of man's creation, it would be decreed upon him, or his nature would draw him to a particular quality, and he could not depart from it. What place would there be for the entire Torah? According to which judgment or sense of justice would retribution be administered, to the wicked or reward to the righteous? Shall the whole world's judge not act justly? Just as the Creator desired that the elements of fire and wind rise upward and those of water and earth descend downward, that the heavenly spheres revolve in a circular orbit, and all the other creations of the world follow the nature which he desired for them, so too he desired that man have free choice and be responsible for his deeds, without being pulled or forced. Rather, he, on his own initiative, with the knowledge which God had granted him, will do anything that man is able to do. Therefore, he is judged according to his deeds. If he does good, he is treated with, how do you read that word?
Beneficence.
Beneficence. If he does bad, he's treated harshly. This is implied by the prophet's statements. This has been the doing of your hands. They also have chosen their own paths. This concept was also implied by Solomon in his statement. Young man, rejoice in your youth, but know that for all these things God will bring you to judgment, i.e. those who have the potential to do, but in the future you will have to account for your deeds. So it's very clear what the Talmud is saying. The Talmud is saying that God doesn't determine whether you're going to be righteous or wicked. So if you're going to be poor or wealthy, if you're going to be smart or not smart, All of these things are determined, but your righteousness or the opposite of that is not determined by God. And this must be the case, says Maimonides, says the Rambam. Because if not, if you don't have freedom to choose between right and wrong, then there's no place for the entire Torah. The entire Torah is about morals, how we should behave, what we should do, what we shouldn't do. If there is no freedom of choice with what's right or wrong, then it wouldn't make sense to have any type of accountability, and there'd be no place for the entire Torah. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about God's plan. We choose between right and wrong, like we discussed, and we're responsible for our choices, but the end result is always going to be in God's hands. So we're not going to ruin God's plan, so to speak. So theoretically, you could pull the trigger, but it's only God who decides when it's a person's time to die. So you could pull the trigger, and at that moment, you made a choice, and you're going to be accountable for that choice because it was a free choice. But that's not going to ruin God's plan. If that person had to die, that person will die. But if he didn't have to die, and if it was not his time yet, you're not going to ruin God's plan. So free choice does not negate God's plan. And God's plan does not compel us to act in a certain way. So two things could be true at the same time. We could have freedom of choice. We could choose between what's right and what's wrong, between good and bad. But at the same time, we're not going to ruin God's plan. God has many ways of doing things, and if something needs to happen, in some way or another, it's going to happen. But that doesn't take away our freedom of choice. And the choices that you make, you are accountable for. I'd like to share with you another story, also a story from the Torah, a story from the Bible, and it is the story of Joseph and his brothers. Joseph was the child of Yaakov, one of 13 children, but Joseph was the favorite. And because he was the favorite, his 11 brothers, were very jealous, and they hated him because of that. So much so, they were so angry, and their hatred was so strong that they plotted to kill him. It was only at the last moment that they changed their mind. Instead of killing him, they sold him as a slave. They sold him as a slave to passing merchants. Anyways, these merchants, they sold Joseph to somebody else. He was sold a couple more times. And before long, Joseph ended up as a butler in the home of a minister in Egypt. And he was successful at his work. His master, Potiphar, treated him very well, and things were going pretty good until things took a turn for the worse. Joseph was wrongly accused, and he ended up in prison. A truly remarkable chain of events followed after that. And after only a few years, Joseph became the viceroy of Egypt. He became the second most powerful man in the most powerful country and the most powerful nation of that time. And from that point on, life obviously was quite good for Joseph. And this continued for about 19, 20 years. In all, it was 22 years that Yaakov thought Joseph was dead. And the brothers thought Joseph to be lost. So it was plenty of time for the brothers to feel remorse, to feel regret. for their terrible sin that they committed. And it was also plenty of time for Yosef to plan his revenge against his brothers. Eventually, after 22 years, the family was reunited. Not only did Yosef not take revenge, but he actually cared for them. He cared for his family, including all of his brothers, until the very last day of his life. Of course, the brothers, they felt terrible for such a terrible act, such a terrible sin that they committed. But Yosef refused to be angry at his brothers, let alone take revenge. This is the story. Let's look at what the brothers said, and let's look at what Yosef said. Let's look at their words, because their words are very powerful and they're recorded in the Torah. So let's look at the text from Bereshit, chapter 42. I think this is text number 4 on the page. And it says like this. This is the brothers speaking. And they said to one another, "Indeed, we are guilty of our brother, that we witnessed the distress of his soul when he begged us, and we did not listen. That is why this trouble has come upon us." These are the words of Yosef's brothers. Now let's take a look at what Yosef said. So this is also from the book of Bereshit, a few chapters later, chapter 45. And it says like this. These are Yosef's words. Then Yosef said to his brothers, "Please come closer to me." And they drew closer. And he said, "I am your brother Yosef, whom you sold into Egypt. But now do not be sad, and let it not trouble you that you sold me here. For it was to preserve life that God sent me before you. For already 2 years of famine have passed in the midst of the land, and for another 5 years there'll be neither plowing nor harvest. And God sent me before you to make for you a remnant in the land and to preserve it for you for a great deliverance. And now you did not send me here, but God. And he made me a father to Pharaoh, a lord over all his household, and a ruler over the entire land of Egypt." So in fact, Yosef was put in charge of all of the storage of the food because there was a terrible famine. He was controlling how it would be distributed. And it was thanks to Yosef that the entire society and the entire region was saved from hunger. But what did Yosef say? Yosef said, don't be saddened. Don't worry. I didn't end up here because of you. God put me here. God put me here so I could provide for my family and I could provide for the entire region. So what did the brothers say? The brothers said, "We're guilty." What did Yosef say? Yosef said, "You didn't send me to Egypt. God sent me to Egypt." Who is correct? Who is right? Are the brothers guilty? Or was it all orchestrated by God? The answer is they are both correct. They're both correct. Because Yosef's brothers, they made a choice. They made a decision. Their decision was to sin. Their decision was to sell Yosef, a horrible act. And what Yosef said to his brothers was, "You made a choice. That's your problem. You're going to be held accountable. That's going to be between you and God. But you are not the reason why I'm in Egypt. God is the one who put me here. He put me here to save the region from a famine and to provide for everyone and for the family." So they're both right. They're both right. The brothers are right. They are guilty. They made a choice. They made a wrong choice. They made an immoral choice, and they are going to be held accountable to God. But that is between the brothers and God. But that is not the reason why Yosef ended up in Egypt. If Yosef was not supposed to end up in Egypt, something would happen at some point, for him to be saved from that and sent somewhere else, or or somehow return home. If Yosef was supposed to be home, he would be home some way or another. The reason why he was in Egypt is because God put him there. God orchestrated events so that he should end up there. Did the brothers have freedom of choice? Of course they did, and that's why they're held accountable. Could they ruin God's plan? And could they change God's plan? No. God has a plan, and one way or another, it's going to happen. Any questions or comments on that? Yes, Paul, please go ahead.
From what I understand of the Bible is that, or of the Torah, Genesis, God's plan was for Cain is just taking a different perspective here on it. Cain do the right thing, but he wound up killing his brother. He wanted him to not to kill his brother, but he did kill his brother. So, in other words, the person that he put in the position of responsibility to do the right thing may not do the right thing. So then if that happens, God will choose another person, as he did with Seth. So God's will is what will be accomplished, but whether the person he chooses to do his will may not be that person. It may be somebody else. God will choose somebody else if that person fails, because that person has a choice.
I hear you loud and clear. It's hard to answer this question case by case because we don't know God's ways. But the general idea and the general belief, I'll only repeat what I said before, that we have the choice to pull the trigger, but only God decides when someone's time came. So I don't know exactly what happened with Cain and Abel. I don't know exactly happens with in specific situations. We don't know. We don't have the ability to always make sense of things. And so many times we're not supposed to make sense of tragedies that happen. But at the same time, Judaism does believe that we cannot ruin God's plan. If God didn't decide that someone should die on this day, that person is not going to die. So I hear you loud and clear, and it would seem like once Abel is gone, how is his mission supposed to be complete? So maybe someone else has to complete it. I understand the issue. I understand the question, and I don't have an answer, to a specific situation. But I'll share the general belief is that while we make a choice, we could only make moral choices. We could only make moral choices, but we don't get to decide who's going to live and for how long. That's not for us to decide. Now, this raises so many questions. How could God have allowed certain things to happen? And these are very strong questions and important questions, and they need to be asked. But that doesn't change the belief and the perspective of Judaism. The perspective of Judaism is that the only choices we could make are moral. So if you're in front of a cash machine, yes, you could attempt to make a robbery. But if you're not supposed to have that money, something will happen for you to fail. Maybe you'll have it temporarily and you'll lose it, or something will happen. But we saw in the Talmud, we don't decide if we're going to be wealthy or poor, right? It might seem like we make choices, but guess what? Sometimes people make a very large investment, and sometimes people, put all of their energy in making a certain business deal work. And guess what? Where do they make their money? Not from that deal, but from some place completely unexpected. So we could make choices. We make moral choices. But Judaism believes, and I know this might be difficult to understand and to accept, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't be asking, and that doesn't mean we shouldn't be demanding from God. How could some tragedies have happened? We should ask, and we must ask, and this is a whole conversation for itself. But the fundamental belief is that we humans don't decide who is going to live and what day they're going to die. So this was up until this point, we talked about the Jewish answer to a very general question, to a philosophical question, right? The philosophical question is, are we programmed? Is life predetermined, or do we have freedom of choice? It's a philosophical question. You don't have to be Jewish to ask this question. The answer is the Jewish perspective. This is the Jewish view on this question. But now that we bring Judaism into the equation, and once we talk about what Judaism has to say about this, now we have an additional question. This is a Jewish question, the question that I'm about to ask. Because Judaism also believes that God is all-knowing. God is perfect. He knows everything. There is nothing outside of him, of his understanding, and of his knowledge. So this presents a totally new question and a very powerful question. If it's true that God knows everything, and God knows what we're going to choose, then what kind of free choice is that? That doesn't seem to be free choice at all. And if he does not know what we're going to do, then God is not all-knowing. And perhaps he's not as perfect as we're making him out to be. So again, if God is all-knowing, he knows what we're going to choose, what kind of free choice is that? And if he doesn't know, what kind of God is that? He's not all-knowing. He's not perfect. What's the answer to this question? Anybody want to comment?
If I was going out and I wanted to make sure that I wanted my wife to be waiting for me when I come home, I wouldn't chain her to the wall. I'd like to trust her. And if and I don't know what she's going to do if I trust her. She might do something. She may go with the husband, somebody else's husband down the hall. But when I come home and I find out that she didn't do that, I'm going to be very happy. I don't think God is I think God can choose to know. He can choose to make us do things, but he'd rather be like me when I go out. He'd rather, let's see what my child is going to do. And when I come back, if there's a turkey on the table, it'll be what a pleasant surprise. In love, if the purpose of life is joy, if that's what God wants to feel himself, then he has to be able to give us the chance to take responsibility without being on our back all the time. He has to, we can surprise him and make him happy.
Very well said. Very well said. I like that. So you prefer to say that God does not know, and we have a complete freedom to choose between what's right and between what's wrong.
I prefer to say that God doesn't want to know everything. He wants to give us.
God does not want to
room.
Okay, that's good. That's a good perspective. I'd like to give you the perspective that I have found in the Jewish texts and in the Jewish sources. This comes from Maimonides and from other commentaries, giant scholars, giant Torah scholars. And here's what they say. God does know what we are going to choose. I still like what you said, Paul, by the way. But says the Rambam, says Maimonides, God does in fact know what we are going to choose. So how do we have free choice? What kind of free choice is that? The answer is that we are not compelled by God's knowledge. The opposite is true. We create God's knowledge. So it's because of our choice that God knows what we're going to do. God knows the decision that we're going to make because we are making that decision. Okay, so let's say this again, because I know it's difficult to understand. We are not compelled by God knowing what we're going to choose. We're not compelled by God's knowledge. On the contrary, we create God's knowledge. What does that mean? That means that, and this is difficult to understand, time is a creation. Time is a creation. God created time. So God is not bound by time. God transcends time. So he knows what we're going to choose ahead of time because of the choice that we made or we are going to make. That's how he knows. So God knows what we're going to do because we made that choice ourselves, because we made that free choice. It's just that for God, there is no time. God is not bound by time. So he knows what we are going to choose in the future. God knows what we are going to choose in the future. So we are not compelled by God's knowledge. We are creating what God knows. We are making the choice, and it's because we are making an absolutely and completely free choice that God knows what we're going to do. So it's because God is not bound by time that he knows what we are going to choose in the future. Still difficult to understand. Let me give an example. An example is an astrologer. You ask an astrologer to predict the future. So he'll look into the stars and tell you what he sees. He's going to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow. But what the astrologer says to you in no way compels you to choose in any one way. He sees what he sees, but that doesn't take away from your freedom to choose. Okay, so the astrologer is doing a similar thing. He's going ahead of time. So he's telling you what's going to happen. He's telling you what he sees. Now, tomorrow you can do something else and then see what happens. You can go the other way, see how that works out. You could make the opposite choice, but it does. The point is that what the astrologer said, what the astrologer sees, does not compel your choice because he's just looking into the future ahead of time. And it's the same thing with God. God is all knowing, so God knows what we are going to choose, but it's not because, but we are not compelled by that knowledge. On the contrary, it's because of our choice that God has this knowledge. Okay, it's a bit of a brain twister, but that's what specifically the Ravid explains this quite in detail, and others as well. I would like to finish off with one more point, one more idea, and of course afterwards everyone is invited to stay and to discuss this more at length, questions, answers, whatever, or share whatever comments you want to make. I know this is very philosophical and very very heavy conversation. I'm sure a lot of you have opinions or questions, and we should definitely discuss it. I would just like to make one more point before we're done. I'd like to read with you the last text on the page, and this also comes from Maimonides, from the Laws of Tshuva, chapter 3, paragraph number 4. So it's the last text on the page. You can see it right here. It says like this: accordingly, throughout the entire year, a person should always look at himself as equally balanced between merit and sin, and the world as equally balanced between merit and sin. If he performs one sin, he tips his balance and that of the entire world to the side of guilt and brings destruction upon himself. On the other hand, if he performs one mitzvah, he tips his balance and that of the entire world to the side of merit and brings deliverance and salvation to himself and others. This is implied by the verse, a righteous man is the foundation of the world. He who acted righteously tipped the balance of the entire world to merit and saved it. So we started with a question. We wanted to understand, is life predetermined? Are we programmed, or do we have freedom of choice? Judaism insists that we do in fact have freedom of choice. It's true. Many of life situations, perhaps all of life situations, are part of God's plan and are programmed into the creation and are predetermined. But we have complete freedom to choose when it comes to a moral question. We have complete freedom to choose between right and wrong, between good and bad. This is what we are entrusted with. This is the responsibility that we have, and therefore we will be held accountable. So yes, you might have difficult circumstances. Life might have thrown at you some difficult challenges, but you should know, and the Torah tells you, and God tells you, that you are not a victim of your life situations. On the contrary, you have the possibility, you have the ability to rise above that, to overcome whatever challenge, to make the right choices, to make the moral choice, to choose right, and to choose what's good. And what we see here from the Rambam is how important our decision making is. We have to look at the world, and it's very likely, it's very possible that the world is at an equal scale, an equal balance between good and bad. And one small act, even if it's something that seems insignificant, one small choice that you make, a positive choice, could tip the scale for the good and bring redemption to you and to everyone. So this is the power of our choice. This is the importance of our choice. We have complete freedom to choose when it comes to right and wrong, moral questions of good and bad. This is the tremendous impact that our choice could make, that our decision making could have. And so let us try our best to only make good decisions, moral decisions, and right decisions.